Hi again guys, and welcome to another installment of Rivals on Gran Turismo 6, and in this particular Rivals matchup we're pitting four 1980s shape Group C prototypes in a head-to-head showdown. Now these cars are typically known by the generalised name of Le Mans cars, but for some of these that's actually not the case. Ironically enough, one of the most popular cars which most people would call a Le Mans car on Gran Turismo, the Minolta from Toyota, is not a Le Mans competing vehicle. It never ran in the Le Mans. So interestingly enough, it's a blanket statement which doesn't necessarily actually cover all of these cars. Group C though is the category that covers these vehicles, and we've discussed other LMPs and Group Cs before, such as the 787B versus the Peugeot 905 and various others. And as always, there is extra information in the description and at the end of the video about these cars, but for now let's first of all get into the individual rundowns. First up we have the Mercedes Sauber C9, and this is the car which actually won the 1989 Le Mans. It's also, as far as I'm aware, the fastest Le Mans prototype ever, with the top speed of 254 miles per hour at the old style Lasat track. Now this particular model on GT6, and to be honest on every Gran Turismo game, has always been one of the strongest Group C cars or Le Mans prototypes in the game. It's got strong handling, it's a dependable all-round machine, and it's incredibly powerful and very quick in a straight line. Now interestingly, on GT6 it's actually not quite as dominating as it used to be, for instance on GT4. But it is still a very quick car, and as you can see from the lap time quoted here, it certainly can hustle around Silverstone, and you'll have a better comparison of how quick that lap time is once you see the times of the other cars. But overall, this vehicle is a very strong all-round prototype. It's a dependable one. It's a very expensive one though. It's one of the most expensive in the game, especially if you don't include stealth models, but I would say that it is worth it, because overall it's strong in a straight line, it has great handling, it's a premium, and it's historically significant as a collector's piece, so it really is the whole package. Next up though, we'll consider the Minolta. Now the Toyota Minolta, or the 88CV more accurately, is the car which, as I mentioned, didn't run in the Le Mans. That was actually brought to my attention by a viewer of the first review series I ever did on this channel, Spirit of Le Mans. And this car has always, like the Sauber C9, been one of the strongest cars in the game ever since its inclusion, also in Gran Turismo 4. Unfortunately though, the Minolta is still not a premium car, and that's a shame, because it would be cool to have that fully detailed interior, especially with the cozy, very low-slung cockpit that the Minolta has. If you actually look at the shape of this car, the driver seems to sit considerably lower in the body and in the frame than in something like a Sauber C9 or a 787B, where the cockpit protrudes quite high out of the body, whereas with the Minolta it's very low slung and has almost an aero kind of look to it, like a jet of some kind, which is pretty cool. Now for an 80s vehicle, it certainly looks very modern. It looks like a much newer machine than any of the other cars here. And although it doesn't have the Le Mans pedigree that the three other cars here do have, it's still incredibly strong. The PP is ridiculously high, as is the power. The weight is very low. In fact, it's one of the lowest of any Group C or LMP machine. And overall, the Minolta is one of those cars which pretty much everyone who's played Gran Turismo since the fourth game knows this is a monster. It's a dependable car that will pretty much never let you down. Next up we have another premium model like the Sauber C9, the Jaguar XJR9, the car that I started out with in the Spirit of Le Mans series. This has always been one of my favourite prototypes ever since it was included, funnily enough, again on Gran Turismo 4. Back then it wasn't a premium, whereas now it has been updated like the Sauber C9, and this is probably my favourite car of the four. Now funnily enough, it is also the slowest, but I just love to drive the XJR9. It's got a rich feel to it that some of the other prototypes don't have, and I would say that the XJR9 actually feels considerably different to drive than most of the other prototypes, newer and older. It's a bit clumsier almost, it feels a bit heavier, but it's smoother, easier to drive, and is, for me at least, more enjoyable to drive, even though it's not as quick. So although I wouldn't pull it out to set the best lap time, I would pull it out if I fancy driving something just for the fun of it, or if I want to have a classier victory rather than just an easy one. In terms of overall ability though, it is one of the quickest Group C cars in a straight line, and although the handling isn't quite as strong as some of the others here and otherwise, it's still a great car, and it has no trouble whatsoever outrunning GT1 machines, more production-based racing cars, and to be honest, when you're going up against vehicles that are as dominating as Group C cars, to say that this is slower than the rest of them really doesn't mean that much, because they are all incredibly fast around the track, but it's just a nice car to own. And notably, it did win the 1988 Le Mans. And finally we have the Nissan R89C. This is by far the more overshadowed brother of the R92CP for obvious reasons. The R92CP is my favourite Le Mans prototype, or Group C prototype more accurately, of all time. It's the most powerful Group C car ever built, and so this car quite naturally tends to get overshadowed by that. Now interestingly, this Nissan has a very, very similar shape to the Jaguar. It has the covered rear wheels, it very much looks like an 80s machine, and the funny thing is, although in some ways it is the least impressive of these cars, it's the heaviest for instance at 900 kilos, it's the quickest of all four around this track, as you can see from the lap time. Now not by much, it's only fractionally, and I mean fractionally quicker than the Minolta, but still, given the fact that it does have less power, is heavier, and is also cheaper than all of the other cars here, that's pretty impressive. Now overall, any of these four cars, in fact I would say any of the prototypes in the game, are fantastic collector's pieces. They mostly have great historical significance, many of them have victories under their belt, and they will all give you great lap times. But it's time to, as we always do, find out which one wins on paper. Now, as you lay out the specs of these four vehicles, you do start to see that, as I said, all four of these cars really do have some incredible numbers. The horsepower per ton in particular is insanely high on Group C cars in real life, let alone with upgrades on a game. Now, you do start to see in some ways that there are some very clear winners, in particular when it comes to engine capacity and PP. The Jaguar gets a clear victory for engine size, being a 7-litre, which not only is the biggest of these four, but is actually the biggest of any prototype in the game, and is one of the biggest Group C prototype engines ever. Most Group Cs tend to be somewhere between 3 and 5 litres, so 7 litres really is huge for a prototype. Now, as far as PP, as I said, there's also a very clear winner. The Minolta, by a significant margin, is the winner here, and when you get up above 700, every PP counts, and to be 725, that really does highlight just how good the Minolta really is, and there are actually very few prototypes which can even get higher than that. You can get the R10 and the 908, but they are significantly newer machines with even more power, so it's a real testament to just how strong the 88CV is. But what about the rundown? Well, first of all, we have the price, and interestingly, and this really is a testament to the value for money of the Nissan, it is, as we said, the quickest around the track of these four, but it's also the cheapest, so that makes it pretty amazing value. The price tag is a lot lower at 1.75 million, especially compared to the Sauber C9, and that is enough to easily give the Nissan the point there. As far as engine capacity, well, we already said, that goes to the Jaguar with 7 litres. Having the biggest engine isn't always the best, we've mentioned that before. Of course, with the Mazda 787B being a perfect example, it's a very small engine, but it won the Le Mans. But for the case of the top trump style matchup, we give the biggest engine the point. Next up, of course, is the PP, and as we already said, that point goes to the Toyota Minolta with a massive 725, which really is a far cry away from the only 706 of the Jaguar, which is still very high, but sounds not very impressive in comparison, although it really is. The horsepower, again, goes to the Minolta at just under 1200. It's also one of the most powerful cars in the game. And the torque, interestingly, goes to the Mercedes at 924 foot-pounds, which is an interesting swap, considering that it doesn't have the most power. But the torque figure really does swing completely the other way. It's got so much more torque than any of the other cars here. In fact, it's around 100 foot-pounds more, or close enough. As far as the weight, that point also goes to the Minolta at only 850 kilos, which is very low, in fact, for a Group C car. That's down there with almost the 787B, and that's still nowhere near as light as the Peugeot 905, but those three are kind of the three kings of prototype lightweights, and the horsepower per ton quite easily, of course, goes to the Minolta. It's the most powerful and the lightest, so of course it's the highest at a massive 1407 horsepower per ton. But as I said earlier, all four cars have huge horsepower per ton, as all prototypes in the game do. And overall, although we're not giving the lap times a point, it is interesting to note that coming in first in terms of lap time was the Nissan, then in second is the Minolta, third is the Sauber, and last is the Jaguar. So overall, that means that coming in a joint second place between three cars is the Jaguar with 1 point, the Nissan with 1 point, and the Sauber with 1 point, but perhaps surprisingly, but probably happily for many fans of the car, coming in at first place with 4 points is the Toyota Minolta. Interesting to note just how it falls in terms of on-paper numbers, but as we said, the Nissan was quicker. As always, though, that does depend on the driver, the tuning, certainly it depends on the track, and so, as I said, all four cars are definitely worth checking out, and if you can spare the cash, I would actually recommend trying to buy all of the Le Mans cars, because they all have their own distinct personalities, advantages, disadvantages, and I love them all. Some more than others, of course, but I love them all nonetheless. So that's it overall for this particular Rivals matchup. As always, if there are Rivals matches which you would like to see, then you can, of course, feel free to slap those down in the comments below. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.